Hello? I think we're good. Okay guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another video on my channel. Today we're going to do a full deep dive into creatine monohydrate. Now, I'm going to specifically talk about creatine monohydrate because the other forms of creatine do not have as much research behind them. And furthermore, creatine monohydrate works, it's very inexpensive, and I mean, in general, I don't see why you would take another form of creatine. None of the other versions are superior. So let's get straight into it. This is an advanced lecture. I'm going to be getting more into the science, more into the history at the molecular level. But really anyone can watch this video because I'm going to try to explain things as simply as possible. So what is creatine? Let's start here. So all creatine is it's a naturally occurring tripeptide. What's a tripeptide? So let's break it down, right? Stop. I want my pen tool. Perfect. So let's break this down. We have tri right here. Tri meaning 3, okay? The prefix tri. And then a peptide. What's a peptide? A peptide is basically short chains of amino acids linked by peptide bonds. So right here, we actually have a tripeptide. So we have 3 individual amino acid components, this green one, this black one, and this blue one. They are linked by peptide bonds, and this total structure is called a, oh my gosh, it's so bad, peptide. So if you're wondering, if you're like, wow, this seems very similar to what a protein is, that's because they are literally the exact same. The only difference is a peptide is short chains of amino acids, whereas proteins are going to be much, much, much more. So proteins are very large and long chains of amino acids. So you can kind of think of proteins as like a very large, complex peptide. So that's what creatine is. And I want to point out creatine is naturally created in your body. Now, the things that are responsible for creating creatine are your kidneys, your liver, and your pancreas in about quantities of about 1 to 2 grams a day. So I want to reiterate again, so many people when they look into like creatine and like, oh, this is cheating, you're not natural anymore. Your body already makes creatine. It's something that your body is already producing. The only difference now is you are taking more through a supplement form. I'll talk about this more, but you can actually obtain creatine through meat. And so when you view it through this lens, there's kind of no argument for creatine being unnatural or anything like that. Actually, now that I think about it, I didn't put this in my presentation later on, but basically, yeah, red meats, fish, for example, basically meat in general is going to contain creatine. So whenever you consume red meat, for example, you will be taking in more creatine. Now, the thing is, you might be saying, well, Tyler, why would I possibly take creatine supplementation if I could just, like, if I can't, let's say this is a steak, right? Why would I not take this over like a supplement that I have to buy externally? It's a really good question. The reason this is better is because this requires a ton of meat to meet like the same dosage that's optimal for what you want, which is athletic performance. So I believe it's 1 kilogram of, no, not 1 kilogram. It's like 2 kilograms or something of red meat equals 5 grams of 5 grams of creatine. 5 grams of creatine. So as you can see here, this is a lot of meat, like 2 kilograms of red meat. That's like 5 pounds of meat just to get the same dosage that you would get from a supplement. And so that's why people supplement, right? But by all means, if you're like a 300-pound man that's like shredded and you're on the carnivore diet, heck, you don't need to have creatine supplementation. Next, most of it gets sent and stored in your muscles in the form of phosphocreatine. So, what is phosphocreatine? Just think of it as a version of creatine that is primarily stored in your muscles. Actually, let me rephrase that. Phosphocreatine is the version of creatine that's stored inside of your muscles so it can actually be used. I want you to pay attention to this phospho portion. Phospho meaning it has a phosphate group. That's going to be very important later on. Try to remember that. But again, your kidneys, liver, and pancreas produce creatine naturally, and then it gets sent to mostly your muscles, but also your brain. A little bit in your brain. Lastly, creatine is composed of the amino acids. Remember, we talked about it being a peptide, tripeptide. It's composed of 3 amino acids. The amino acids are going to be arginine, glycine, and methionine. So all 3 of these together, linked by peptide bonds, equates to creatine. So moving on, I won't spend too much time here, but I think this is really important just to know the history of creatine. And so you see this guy right here. Who is this? Creatine was first discovered in 1832 by a French chemist, and I believe he was also a philosopher. His name was Michel Eugène Chevreul. It's definitely a very French name. So what he was doing was he was actually extracting chemical constituents from animal tissue. And when he was working with bone broth, he found this substance that had never been discovered before. It was colorless, it had a crystallized structure, and now we know that this was actually creatine. He had discovered creatine inside of bone broth, so basically meat derived. Now, this is really interesting. So he named creatine because in Greek, the Greek word for meat is kreis. Do you see the correlation? Like creatine, kreis. And so that's why he named it creatine. Now, it wasn't until later when this guy over here, I believe he was German, this guy over here in 1847 basically validated Mr. Michel's original discovery, and he found furthermore that the creatine was responsible for some kind of muscle exertion, something to do with muscle exertion. Because when he was studying foxes, he would find that the captive foxes that, didn't really do anything, they were just kind of like docile, not domesticated, but just sitting around, they would literally do nothing, and he found they had less creatine. And when they were exercising, were active, they were not doing much. And he found wild foxes that are much more physically capable, they all tended to have more creatine in their bodies. Then finally, this is going to be important for safety. So up until then, there's been some research done on creatine, but it wasn't until the late 1900s that people really started researching and experimenting with creatine, because around this time people were starting to pick up that, hey, it actually helps athletic performance. Like, for example, in the late 1900s, Olympic athletes started using creatine. So what does creatine do? So as a primary, creatine is primarily responsible for improving energy regeneration and cognitive function. What does that mean? That means that when you are expending energy, when you are, let's say you're sprinting, you're using up a lot of energy. Creatine is going to regenerate that energy faster so that you have more energy to work with. And so down here, this is why it can allow you to perform more work. For weightlifters specifically, let's say I was doing overhead press and you actually cloned 2 versions of me. One version of me was fully saturated with creatine. The other version didn't take creatine, just relying on my body's like natural production of creatine. And we both lifted 70 pounds for overhead dumbbell press. The version of me that took creatine would be able to pump out maybe 2 or 3 more reps. And that might not seem like a lot, but with time, that definitely leads to marginal growth with time and strength increases, right? That is why people take creatine. But in addition, it also has a lot of cognitive benefits. And recall that back here in the beginning, that some of it gets sent to your brain. That's why there are cognitive effects, because it also has effects on the brain, right? And as a secondary, so this is like the primary function of creatine supplementation and what it does for you. As a secondary, there are many areas in which creatine has been shown to be beneficial, although I will say more research needs to be done. So for example, improving skin health and mitigating the effects of sleep deprivation. Important here, mitigating, not like replace. So if you take creatine, don't think you can, live off of 3 hours of sleep. You still should be getting good sleep. It's just that the research, basically what it shows us is that if you are sleep deprived, let's say you have a flight and you're not going to be able to sleep, if you supplement with creatine, it's going to fight off a lot of those negative side effects of being very sleep deprived. Moving on to section 4, how does creatine work? Let's start over here. The first thing we need to understand is that creatine works on a level of phosphocreatine and saturation, okay? So once your body produces creatine, it gets sent to your muscles, like this is this deltoid. This creatine stuff gets sent into your muscles in the form of phosphocreatine, and it works on a saturation level. So think of it like a sponge. So here's a sponge. What do you know about a sponge and any kind of liquid? Well, you know that initially it's quote unquote dry, and you can saturate it more by adding liquid. So from 0 to 100%. 0% would be like adding nothing. It's completely dry. And then as you add more water, it fully increases up until its maximum saturation where it can't absorb any more water. Your muscles are very similar. It works on a saturation level. And so the more creatine you consume, the more saturated you will be until you hit the peak, 100% saturation, which is ideal for athletes if you care about performance. So as you can imagine, what do you think your creatine level saturation would be right now? Like actually think about it. Probably between 0 and 100, right? Because your body, why? Because your body already produces some creatine naturally, right? It's just that we want to get it to that full saturation level. For most people, they're probably going to be like 60 to 70% saturated. Holy immaturity, bro. 60 to 70% saturated in creatine. And so supplementing would get you to 100%. So now that we know this, let's move on over here. You have to understand these two things. Doing high level activity is going to cause creatine to be at work essentially. Okay, so the first thing that needs to happen is you need to be doing some form of high level physical activity. So your body needs a lot of energy really quick. Now I want to introduce to you creatine kinase or kinase or however you pronounce it. This is an enzyme your body releases to really jumpstart that energy regeneration in the phosphocreatine energy system. If you're familiar with other bioenergy systems, you know there's the oxidative, you know there's the glycolysis system. This is its own energy system. So creatine kinase, how this works is that basically ATP, let's go over here. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, which is the energy. I'll just draw a lightning bolt actually. It is the energy molecule in your body. And the way it works is it has some structure, but it has 3 phosphate groups. This is not actually how it looks, by the way. The way we get energy through this molecule, because this is our energy currency in our body, is we break one of these bonds with the phosphate groups, and that releases energy, a free phosphate group, and it also is going to leave the byproduct of the ATP, which is called ADP. All right? Here's the important part. ADP is kind of useless. It's the byproduct of ATP, right? So why does this matter? Going back here to creatine kinase, when your body starts using a lot of energy for high-level energy bouts, you're going to have a large buildup of ADP, this stuff right over here. And so when your body senses that and it's like, hey, we need a lot of energy really, really quick, creatine kinase, the enzyme, gets released, which jumpstarts the process of converting ADP back into ATP. So that's basically how it works. If I want you to take one thing away from this, it's that when you are performing exercise at a high level, your body, what creatine is going to do is creatine is going to allow you to go from ADP back to ATP, effectively regenerating energy. So you're probably like, cool. So how does that work then? I'm so glad you asked. That's why we're going into it. So to start off with, let's start up here what I just talked about, ATP. So we have our ATP, and that's being used to fund our exercise, right? And then all this stuff is what happens when we exercise, like muscle contraction, the third phosphate bond is broken by the ATP, and all that stuff that we talked about here happens, right? Now we get to ADP, this portion right here. This is our byproduct, kind of calling it like a dead battery. And then you're left with adenine and 2 phosphates, which is the ADP, right? Now, at this point, this is where the phosphocreatine, remember we talked about phosphocreatine stored in your muscles. The only difference is that between this type of creatine and normal creatine is that a phosphate group is added. And then we have our ADP. These two combined will signal to creatine kinase, the worker enzyme, to regenerate ATP. So new ATP and free creatine. Why does this work? Let's go over here to talk about it. So we have our phosphocreatine, right? Phosphocreatine. And then we have our ADP. Remember, to have ATP, we need 3 phosphate groups, right? ADP, adenosine diphosphate, di meaning 2, has 2 phosphate groups. So what happens here is that all we're doing with the phosphocreatine is it's literally donating one phosphate group to ADP, and guess what? 1 plus 2 equals 3. Boom, new ATP. This is how the regeneration works. Regen. And this is the whole process. And you might be wondering, okay, well, it donated the phosphate group and the phosphocreatine. What happens to our creatine guy right here? Well, it gets sent back to the body as free-floating creatine. And then down here, as you can see, when you rest and recover, this is where your body is going to take that free creatine and put it back in your muscles in the form of phosphocreatine. But that happens during rest and recovery, right? So this is how creatine works, and I just think it's really, really interesting. The way I was describing this over here, it kind of reminded me of Khan Academy. I don't know why. All right, next, really important, the safety of creatine. Let me take a sip of this first. I'm doing my workout later. This is Gatorade and then honey. Lots of fast acting carbohydrates with a very high GI index. It's going to help my workout. Anyways, this is really important because, yeah, want to be healthy. You want to be safe. You don't want to take creatine and now you have acne and like mood swings or whatever. And that doesn't happen, by the way. So, to preface, I want to start with this. When I was in high school, my health teacher actually, I asked him about creatine. I'm like, I've heard great things about this. Should I take this? And he said no. He said, I won't get into that. It's kind of like a steroid, which is crazy because he's a health teacher. Love the guy, by the way. Like, absolutely love the guy. Amazing guy. But, now I 100% disagree with him. So let's get straight into it. And the reason I brought that up in the first place is because a lot of people that don't know like anything about fitness are going to tell you like, nah, don't do that. That seems sketchy. So I totally get it. Creatine is arguably one of the most researched sport supplements on the market. Okay. Stop. 1 second. Present. Perfect. So this is good to know. Again, we started experimentation, like heavy experimentation in the 1900s, right? Very heavy experimentation, double-blinded experiments. Let's see. And yeah, creatine is considered generally safe. If you go to any major health websites, health site at all, Mayo Clinic, for example, PubMed, really any kind of research you're going to look at, if it's like good quality research with at least a good amount of people in the sample size, you're going to find that creatine consistently shows to be generally safe. And I have to use the word generally because, if I just say safe, that makes it sound like it literally is like completely safe and there's no way, shape, or form it could possibly be unsafe. And, nothing in life is like that, right? But again, always do your own research and consult with your healthcare professional, all right? So do your own research. Don't just take my word for it. Definitely listen to everything I had to say. And I think my video is great. I 100% believe creatine is beneficial. I believe it works and I believe it's safe. But that's my opinion. I want you to do your own research still. And please ask your healthcare professional for their opinion as well. For populations that experience potential issues, it's really only people with kidney issues. So if you have a history of kidney stones or something, I would definitely reconsider it and look into people taking creatine that also have kidney issues. Definitely talk to your doctor about it though. And here are some references that I highly recommend looking at if you're interested in the safety and efficacy of creatine monohydrate. These are really good studies, very, very good studies, meta-analysis, peer-reviewed research. Highly recommend, highly recommend. Next, let's get into dosaging and the loading phase for part 6. So let's start with this. What is a creatine loading phase? The creatine loading phase, all it is it refers to a period where people take very, very high amounts of creatine to reach full saturation quicker. Remember that your muscles have a spectrum of creatine saturation, potentially, and that when you reach 100, you can't go beyond that because there's only so much creatine your muscles can store. This loading phase allows you to reach full saturation very, very quickly. And so when people say, is this necessary? Absolutely not. You can reach full saturation by using a smaller dose. It's just going to take longer. And so let's imagine this. Let's say you are a Division I swimmer and you are a sprinter and you were on vacation and you're coming back and now you have NCAA Division I championships coming up. That would never happen, by the way. Why would a D1 swimmer that's going to the national championships go on vacation right before and not train or take creatine? But just for my example, imagine this scenario. And when he comes back, he's like, oh man, I really need the benefits of creatine because I have this big event coming up, right? This would be a case in which I'd say, yeah, doing a creatine loading phase would be a great idea because we want to reach full saturation as fast as possible for your big swim meet. And so if you wish to do a loading phase, take 20 to 25 grams of creatine a day for about a week and you'll achieve full saturation. Now, what do you do after this period, after you do this loading phase? Or if you don't decide to do a loading phase, like me, I don't think it's necessary and I wanted to save money. In general, you just take 5 grams a day, best mixed with a beverage. Make sure that you fully dissolve it though, otherwise you'll miss it. If you just dump some in, your water bottle, then you chug it right away, a lot's gonna be like sitting at the bottom. Either that or dry scoop it, then like follow it with like something like Gatorade, water, milk, it doesn't matter, any kind of liquid, and then just swallow it, right? It tastes like nothing. It's kind of like sand unless you get a flavored version. Ideally combine it. I just said that. Ideally take it with food because some people, when they have it right away in the morning, they experience some kind of stomach pain. Part 7. Megadosing and response. This is the last portion, okay? So what is a megadose? There is some research suggesting that there are benefits of megadosing creatine. So taking a very large dose consistently, more than 5 grams a day, much more than that. Kind of similar to taking, like a loading phase dose kind of. So why would people even do this in the first place? Well, it's because there's some research that suggests that it combats negative effects of sleep deprivation, like I mentioned before. There's also some evidence to suggest greater cognitive ability. And also, individuals with a ton of muscle mass, actually think about this. This means their sponge is bigger because it takes more creatine to reach full saturation since they just have a bigger sponge, more muscle mass, right? So like for me, I technically I megadose. I personally do this because I have so much muscle mass and I want these benefits that I'm seeing in some of these research papers, right? Of course, more research needs to be done, but I already know creatine is safe. I have a lot of muscle mass, and so for me, it's like a no-brainer. And so the starting megadose is going to be, sorry, I can't speak, man. It's been a long day. The starting megadose is going to be 10 grams a day, but it can be as high as 20 grams. I personally do like 12 grams a day. I just take my spoonful, measure it out on a food scale, and then dry scoop it in my mouth. If I have a liquid, I always have a liquid. What am I saying? Chug it down with the liquid, boom, we're done. And lastly, this is very important to note, everybody responds differently to creatine levels based on a variety of factors. So for example, like genetics, age can play a role, but the main factor in how you respond to creatine, how it affects you, is going to be your existing saturation levels of creatine. For example, let's go over here. Let's say this guy, he's 50% saturated with creatine, and this guy is 95% saturated. And they both take 5 grams a day. Who do you think is going to experience more benefits, a better response to this creatine supplementation? Obviously this guy, because this guy has so much potential to max out his creatine, his phosphocreatine stores, right? In which it can be used for energy regeneration. This guy is only going to get a very, very minor boost in athletic performance because of creatine, because he's almost fully saturated. And so, this guy has 50% more of his creatine stores to fill. This guy only 5%. So this is all that means right here. But I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. If you did, I make content about fitness, health, life content. I just try to deliver the best quality content I can for you guys in these aspects. My handle is TylerVay7 on Instagram and YouTube. If you want to give me a follow, that'd be awesome. But I'll see you guys in the next